technical decision maker in licensing physics software from my company into the PlayStation 3. So with that, I'd like to welcome Dominic Melanson.
Good morning, and thank you, Manju, for the introduction. And thank you all for coming in so early in the morning to listen to my presentation today. It's great timing to be here. This is actually the launch week in North America for the PlayStation 4. So today I'm going to talk about the product development strategy for PlayStation 4, why we made the decisions we made, and what motivated those decisions. So I'm going to start with a little bit of history. But first, let me tell you a little bit about myself. Manju mentioned some of this already. So I'm Vice President of the Research and Development Group for PlayStation in North America. But I have a very important qualification to go along with that. I am a passionate video gamer. I really love games. So my background is software engineering. And I joined the game industry, the video game industry, back in 1992. So I joined a small company back then called Psygnosis in Liverpool, England. And at that time, well, I graduated in computer science, and I started off in kind of the serious computer science disciplines. Worked on a C++ compiler, worked on factory automation. But I'd always kind of grown up tinkering with home computers like the ZX81 or playing with the early consoles like the Atari VCS. So when the opportunity came up at Psygnosis, I jumped at the opportunity to join them. And I began working there on a technology called CD-ROM, which at the time was new. And it was Psygnosis' early commitment to CD-ROM that motivated Sony to purchase Psygnosis in 1993. So I worked on a couple of games at Psygnosis, Microcosm and Novastorm, and these were for the 3DO Interactive Multiplayer, which was one of the earliest commercial CD-ROM consoles. And maybe you've not heard of these games, but I hope that some of you at least will have heard of Wipeout, which was a launch title for the original PlayStation. And when Sony came to Psygnosis and introduced Psygnosis to the original PlayStation, I knew at that point that I'd made the right decision to join a gaming company, because PlayStation just had so much potential, and it was obviously recognizable. And I was also really lucky to join a fantastic team developing Wipeout. I began programming and ended up being the producer on the title. And it was just a very rewarding experience. So I worked on a couple more games at Psygnosis and then moved more towards the central technology for games. And then in 1998, I crossed the Atlantic and joined a newly formed research and development team out here in the Bay Area. And so that meant I transitioned away from the game focus much more into the platform focus, so supporting all of the game developers. Now, a robust R&D group is essential for any high-tech company. It allows you to innovate and it allows you to stay ahead of the curve. And if you do things right, it allows you to lead the industry. And I was privileged to help form just such an R&D team, growing it from about 6 in 1998 to well over 100 today. And today we work on platform software for PlayStation, software development kits, tools and libraries. We do not do all of it. We do a subset of the SDK. A lot of it is done in Tokyo. And we also work on design and prototyping for some peripherals. So our team worked on the first iToy camera for PlayStation 2, which you can see on the top left there. And then more recently, we worked on the PlayStation Move. So that brings me up to date with my career so far. And now I want to talk a little bit about the consoles that led up to PlayStation 4, PlayStation 1, 2, and 3. So when Sony Computer Entertainment was first formed, it was a small company within the Sony group. And we didn't stop too hard to think about what we were doing. We just made the product that we believed in. And I think this we helped to shape what is now the mainstream gamer identity. PlayStation 1 and 2 were, in some part, successful because they made the transition to optical media. So before PlayStation 1, most of the big-name consoles worked on cartridge ROM. And the lead time to manufacture a cartridge ROM was large. The cost of the ROM was large. The stock risk was significant. And so this really stifled the industry back then. So when we kind of introduced CD-ROM as a mainstream alternative, all those costs went down, and the lead time to get into retail went down. And the retailers thrived on this, which is why I've subtitled this slide, The Retail Years. And of course, customers also benefited from this as well. So you can also say that for PlayStation 1 through 3, we were also defined in some way by the disk format that we used for those consoles. So PS1, of course, established CD-ROM. PS2 put DVD on the map. And for many people, PlayStation 2 was their first DVD video player. For PlayStation 3, arguably our introduction of Blu-ray on PS3 tipped the balance in the high-definition video format wars. And for many people, they would say that at launch, PS3 player. Looking at PlayStation 1 and 2, when I look back, we didn't really have a conscious strategy. But I think now, in retrospect, our strategy was very much to look at the intersection of technology and games and focus there. So, towards the end of PlayStation 2, we did introduce a hard disk drive, and we did introduce networking. But those were for very specific gaming reasons, for games like SOCOM and Final Fantasy XI. On the technology side, we saw rapid improvements in system-on-chip technology and on the ability to put GPUs in the box. The GPU was pretty new when we introduced PlayStation 1. And so all this kind of enabled our gamer vision. I want to make a special mention here for the PlayStation 1 controller. Again, prior to PlayStation, the game pads were a kind of flat slab of plastic with a few buttons on them. We realized we could use, more advanced manufacturing technologies to make an ergonomic controller that really was comfortable for gamers to use. And then we've innovated on that controller over time, adding analog sticks and haptic feedback. And I'll talk later about where we are with the latest controller. And then came PlayStation 3. And we realized with PS3 that we could do so much more. And in fact, one of our brand messages at the time was, it only does everything. We continued the technology trend, introducing Blu-ray, but we also designed, or co-designed, a whole new microprocessor technology called Cell. And Cell was the precursor to today's APUs, very much a heterogeneous architecture. But unfortunately, it was complicated to use. It had many distributed memories requiring DMA and synchronization, and the developers found it really tough to get to grips with. Also on PS3, as standard, we built in a hard disk drive, and we built in networking. And so we had to build system software to make use of all these hardware features. And so we needed to build in a web browser, a Blu-ray player with a Java virtual machine, media player, network services. And so all of this caused the complexity and the cost of software and hardware to rise dramatically. And it's fair to say that we did spread ourselves a little bit too thin, just trying to do only everything. But don't get me wrong, PS3 is a great product and a great success. But it caused us to stop and think, and we learned a lot of lessons, and some of those lessons we've applied now in our design for PlayStation 4. So several years ago now, when we began thinking about PlayStation 4, we first asked ourselves a very important question. It says, what does PlayStation stand for? So we got together a team across the company. We sat them in a room for a few weeks, and we asked them, each of them, what they felt PlayStation was about, not just as a brand, but also as a company identity. And what they came up with was that as a company, we're passionate about video games. And our belief is that great play gives people the power to be extraordinary. And the behavior that we want to exhibit is to be the masters of magic. We want to be the champions of great play and just a little bit irreverent with it. And our offer to the customer is to be the best place to play. And in summary, PlayStation exists to push the boundaries of play. And once we had this rejuvenated message inside of the company that people could get behind, we found that a lot of the decisions that we came across when we started making PlayStation 4 became much more natural. And we stopped trying to make a product that was all things to all people. And instead, we focused on enabling this great play. And I think it's a simple truth for all companies, that if you recognize what you believe in as a company, and then you innovate according to that belief, then many other things will fall into place. Of course, there is still a lot of hard work. So PlayStation 4. As I mentioned, we went back to our roots, and we focused once again on the gamer. The PS4 itself is not a supercomputer, although it is a pretty amazing piece of technology. And in fact, PS4 is only somewhat about the physical box. It's equally about the passionate community of gamers and the network services that we offer. And although it starts with retail and it starts with physical discs, these days it's also about the digital entertainment. And our customers expect us to be able to deliver content through download. They want streaming. They want to share on a social network. And so we started to form a set of principles for what the PS4 design should be. I'll just read these off. So it is simple, immediate, integrated, social, and personalized. So when we kicked off the PlayStation 4 project, we chose Mark Cerny as our lead system architect. And Mark has been developing games since, I believe, 1982. And he's a super smart guy. And he kept the whole team laser focused on what gamers and game developers want. From an R&D perspective, we spent a lot of time looking at what has changed in the gaming landscape since we launched the PlayStation 3 back in 2006. And a lot has changed in that time. If you cast your mind back to PS3 launch, there was no iPhone, there was no App Store. In fact, Facebook had only been publicly available for 2 months when we launched the PlayStation 3. So a lot has changed. We studied the phenomenal rise of mobile and of social networking. And then we took some of these elements where it made sense and we applied them to our PlayStation 4 design. As an example, we now have second screen functionality. We used this with our PlayStation Vita handheld, with the PlayStation 3. But now for PlayStation 4, we've really integrated that at a deep level, supporting second screen not only on the PlayStation Vita, but also on iOS and Android devices. The immediate principle here, we wanted to make sure that we could reduce the frustration of wait times as much as we could. So, for example, we studied how to do better background downloading of patches and updates to reduce that disruption. We looked at our social, we looked at the friends on PlayStation 3, and we overhauled that system. We dramatically increased the number of friends that you can have on the system. And we also introduced, most importantly, true names. So on PS3 it was an online ID. and an avatar. And now, optionally, you can also use a true name. We've integrated the PlayStation Vita very closely with the PlayStation 4 experience. So we have a feature called Remote Play, which allows you to stream your PlayStation 4 gameplay over a Wi-Fi network to your PlayStation Vita. And we expect that most PS4 games will support this, unless they require a special peripheral, such as the PlayStation camera. Now, on the eve of PlayStation 4's launch, the enthusiasm for console gaming, in my opinion, has never been greater. We've had colossal hits recently, towards the end of the console lifecycle even. Games like Grand Theft Auto 5 and Call of Duty Ghosts. GTA 5, I think, did $1 billion in its first 3 days. And it also sold close to 29 million units. And that announcement was several weeks back. Call of Duty Ghosts, again, did $1 billion sell through into retail on its first day. So these are really strong indications that the future for console gaming is very, very promising. So to deliver on the promise, we have to give a PlayStation 4 hardware architecture that can allow people to make these great games that we require. So when we looked at the PlayStation 4 architecture, we made our decisions based around what the developer needs and what the gamer wants. We involved developers throughout the process. Going back as early as 2008, we were asking people what they wanted in the PlayStation 4. We kept getting that input, and we kept making changes along the process. So developers, they wanted a familiar and simple development environment. And they were all using PC already, so we used a PC familiar architecture. But we made it much easier, because now with the new heterogeneous APUs, we offer a single unified memory. The gamers, of course, they want high-performance graphics. They want simulations to make their world super believable and run at a smooth 1080p. So we chose a best-in-class APU, and a great thanks goes out to the team at AMD who helped us create this. I'll talk more about within the APU, of course, there is the CPU cluster and the GPU. But also within the APU, there is a audio chip, which is based on the true audio technology for audio processing. And there's video, so there's video encoding and UVD. But a little more on the CPU and the GPU. So the CPU cluster is an 8-core Jaguar architecture. And this gives us great general purpose processing at low power and relatively low die area, which is great news. Because the heart of any gaming system is the GPU, and it's also the most die area. And for that, we went with the GCN architecture. And we built in a pretty massive 18 compute units, which gives us enormous floating point capability, enormous graphics rendering, and compute. We're already beginning to see some developers games, and with conferences like this, we're going to see a lot more of that happening. So gamers, they want very detailed worlds and very detailed environments, and for that, we chose to have 8 gigabytes of system RAM, and in addition, of course, a hard drive to be able to download and cache that data, and to do user-generated content. I think if you asked game developers what their single favorite hardware feature is on a PlayStation 4, they'd probably tell you it's the 8 gigabytes of GDDR5. And I say that because they told us. They gave us very strong feedback that that was what they wanted. And we made changes to make sure they got it. This configuration of GDDR5 delivers 176 gigabytes per second of memory bandwidth, which is enormous by anybody's standards. And it is crucial, when you've got that much compute power in your GPU, it is crucial to be able to get the data throughput to feed it. In terms of capacity, in the past consoles, we'd put memory capacities in which were more akin to an embedded style of development. And worse, they were actually split between the GPU and the CPU in terms of memory pools, a segmented architecture. So by having 8 gigabytes and having 5 memory, we gave developers enormous flexibility. Of course, some developers always want more, but I think this really does take the pressure off. So game developers, gamers, pretty much everybody wants an attractive price point and a stable, long-lived platform. So we designed, as we have done in the past, we designed for a 10-year life cycle. And we selected components and semiconductor processors which are very mainstream, which will allow us to hit these very aggressive cost targets and to continue to cost reduce over time. We also built in some more advanced features into the PlayStation 4 architecture and into the APU. For example, we have really detailed, fine-grained compute features. And some of these features will take a little more time for developers to master. And the end result is that games will continue to get better and better through that 10-year life cycle. So developers can very quickly get good content onto the PlayStation 4. So this describes the hardware in the box itself. But also, there's one very important piece of hardware that gamers need, and that is the controller. So the DualShock 4 is our most recent evolution in a long line of very highly praised game controllers. Back to the PlayStation 4. And so we put a lot of effort into getting it right. We started with a large team, mainly the game developers, with a big shopping list of features. We made prototypes with all sorts of wacky items on them. And then that team iterated, and they whittled down the features to give us what we have today, which is, we believe, the best balance of ergonomics, features, and cost. So above DualShock 3, we added some features. You'll see in the middle there is a big multi-touch pad. It's also a button. We have a loudspeaker. This is a wireless controller, so we have wireless audio to the loudspeaker on the controller. But you can also plug in a headset with mic and audio. We spent a great deal of time finding the analog sticks and the buttons and the feel of the controller, the triggers, making sure that they were as good as they could be. You'll notice in the bottom right there's a blue glowing light bar. And this allows us to do a couple of things. First of all, it allows us to identify the players in a very simple way. So we can say, you are player blue, you are player red. It's very easy. On the DualShock 3, we had some very obscure little LEDs that lit up to tell you which player number you were. And that was always confusing. But also, if you have the PlayStation camera peripheral, the camera can track this light bar. And by doing sensor fusion, the gyros and accelerometers inside of the DualShock 4, we can deliver some pretty advanced tracking features, similar to the PlayStation Move. And perhaps one of my favorite additions is not really an addition at all. So on PlayStation 1, we had 2 buttons called Select and Start right in the middle. And the meaning of Select and Start has become ambiguous over the years. So we took those buttons out and we replaced them with 2 new buttons, the first of which is called Options. And Options is just a much better name, self-explanatory name, for what people already use the Select button for. But the second one, and as far as I'm concerned the most important one, is the Share button. When I looked at our principles, social was one of them, and simple was another. And when we looked at how gamers like to share their gaming experiences, we decided that it was absolutely critical to have a dedicated button, one press, to be able to share where you are with your friends at any time. So you can upload screenshots and you can upload video to popular sites like Facebook and Twitter. But it's also broadcast live. As you're playing, you can broadcast your live session. People can spectate on that session, and they can join in, or they can buy the game, or they can comment. And we've partnered with services such as Ustream and Twitch TV to enable this. On the APU side, we have the video encoder, which is always running in the background. It's always encoding. And we use that for the remote play feature, which I mentioned earlier. And we also use it for this live broadcast. And the game developer doesn't have to worry about it. It just happens in the background for free. Well, I see that I'm running out of time. I would like to tell you a lot more about PS4 and the great games we have coming, but unfortunately not today. So, the PS4 is coming to most territories during November and December. Later on, in February of next year, we'll launch in Japan. But here, in North America, we're launching on Friday. Now for almost 12 months. And our whole team at Sony Computer Entertainment is committed to delivering this best place to play. And so we're really excited about Friday, because that's when the console gets into the hands of the gamers and when the fun really begins. So I hope today that I've given you some insight into why we made the choices we made. And I hope also that I've motivated at least some of you in the audience to become PlayStation 4 developers and join us. And I'm supposed to have a URL there. Sorry, I don't. But there's a URL which I can provide later, which will allow you to go and sign up for the developer program. So, I'm going to leave you with a short video which sums up the promise of the PlayStation 4. And thank you very much for listening. Bye.
The best thing about developing for the PlayStation 4 is we aren't forced to concentrate on the limits. We're able to concentrate on the immersion in the experience.
Technology no longer limits our imagination.
I know I can actually do stuff I love everywhere I am without any barriers.
This new hardware lets us create a huge world full of life and action. It's bigger than anything we've been able to do before.
Never really been approached in terms of size of the world, in terms of freedom, in terms of feeling of exploration.
The truth is you'll feel the difference. You reach a level of true expression.
PlayStation